long ago, and it happened far away. The moral of the story has been lost until today. Although we shouldn't let the past complicate the now, we wrap a stack of artifacts that help us show us how. Whatnot hopes and soggy dreams become who I am today. I'm feeling more alive in more important ways. Lost all ability to think for myself. I put it on the table, then you help yourself. Wow. This race seeks self-corruption. Shots fired confirm my assumption. Everyone is evil in their own special way. This advice I'm giving you today.
Welcome everybody, good to be with you today. Welcome to our lesson called Pax and Pox. Pax, P-A-X, what is that? Cynthia?
Peace?
Peace, yes. Pax, P-O-S, what is that? Or P-O-X? P-O-S, that's this one.
Destruction? I don't know.
Curse, especially a curse of disease. A pox on this house is a curse on the people.
Chicken pox.
Especially, yes, the chicken pox, the smallpox. Those two things together, in many ways, sum up the 3 centuries or so that happened after the reign of Augustus Caesar. You spent a lot of time with Augustus Caesar, those of you who did Augustus as a project, and you taught us all about Augustus Caesar, the first emperor of Rome who brought peace to the world, at least was his claim. And though, like any claim, any political claim, there's a lot of spin there. He's surely hasn't brought peace to the whole world. He has brought a lot of peace, though it's the peace that comes with a boot on your throat. One crucial thing he failed to do was establish a clear succession pattern for the emperors of Rome. Part of that, I think, has to do, I'm trying to read the mind of Augustus Caesar, so this will not be an exact science. But part of that, I think, has to do with the fact that it has to do with his pretense to be nothing but a conservative. That, hey, I'm just one of you guys, just one of the guys. Princeps, sure, I'm the first among equals, but I'm just the first citizen. There's nothing special here. I'm sure I'm not your king. No. And as much as he would have loved to have a son be Augustus II, A, he didn't, and B, he knew that stinks too much of monarchy.
I have a question. If I remember correctly in the Augustus presentation, when he was sculpted, he was made to retain some of his human qualities. But despite this preaching about, oh, I'm just one of you guys, not really, the king, he was still, affirming that he was superior, right?
Sure. So he wants you to figure out how superior he is. He wants you to figure out that he's a walking god.
There you go, yeah.
He's never gonna make that claim. When he dies, the empire goes to Tiberius, who eventually was named his successor, but Tiberius is far from his first choice. Tiberius is his wife's son from her prior marriage. So Augustus adopted stepsons. Everyone he really wanted was unavailable due to being dead. So eventually, Augustus calls Tiberius out of a semi-exile that he had sent him into and starts begrudgingly grooming him to take over. It would be like, if I make Matt Makovich the next classical studies teacher, that can only mean that there has been a terrible, terrible accident and no one else was available. See, Tiberius' father was part of the other big politically connected old money family of Rome, the Claudians, not the Julians, where Augustus came from. So handing over principness to Tiberius was something he did because he had no other options. He couldn't trust anyone else. This is Augustus' dynasty, and they're all related through complex marriages and in-lawdoms and cousindoms. There does seem to be a pox on the Roman empires that the Roman emperors, that sort of the one job where you want to have sons, like none of them are able to make sons. So none of these are father and son, but they're all distantly related to each other in what historians call the Julio-Claudian dynasty. You can read all about this particular dynasty in Tom Holland's Dynasty, The Rise and Fall of the House of Caesar. Of the 5 Julio-Claudians, Tiberius is dull but effective. Claudius, dull but very effective. And Caligula and Nero are stark raving lunatics.
Okay.
Insane, power hungry, psychotic. They torture, they rape, they kill for their own amusement. Caligula may have appointed a horse as consul, yes.
I'm really sorry. I'm making really bad first impressions, but they also look like they'd be the type to be psychotic. Like, I don't know why.
Ooh, is it cause what?
Especially Nero.
Yeah,
Nero looks like a Discord
Nero looks like his leprosy. Nero literally looks like his
you.
leprosy.
So Nero is like, all right, Caligula's life is so depraved that the biographical film Caligula is literally rated X.
White
Nero is like it's like if Jeffrey Dahmer were really emo.
Also in Rome.
Nero's wife claimed to be pregnant. He didn't believe her, so he cut her open to find out. He had his own mother killed. His last words when when the people got so tired of him that he was forced to commit suicide because they would have done far worse to him. His last words were, "Ah, what an artist dies with me," as he slit his own throat.
His eyes are just.
Josh, it kind of looks like you, I'm not gonna lie.
With Nero dies the Julio-Claudian dynasty, but by this time there was no Julian blood left in the dynasty. The bloodline of Julius Caesar
Bro ran out.
and his nephew Augustus died out. The first great dynasty is gone. It's gonna be chaos, and so Pascali, can you tell me what year that is? I can't see very well.
69
Yes,
AD.
the year 69
Funny number.
was the year of 4 emperors in 1 year, and it wasn't 3 of them died of old age right away. It's a period of chaos, civil war. Vespasian comes out on top.
Really?
We move on to a dynasty, yes.
Marcus Aurelius.
Yes, but I didn't notice until I had already put this together that apparently I grabbed this picture from a Polish source, and so between 96 and 180, we have a period that the ancient historians call the time of the 5 good emperors. This is yet another dynasty, the Nervan Antonine dynasty. Under Trajan's rule, the empire expands to its greatest extent. When Trajan dies in 117 AD, the empire will never expand any further. Hadrian, remembered as a great emperor, but also the one who made the decision. The fact that imperial expansion stopped was on purpose. There is a limit to how much control one guy in Rome can have over an empire, and it had become too costly, too far spread out. So Hadrian said, I'm going to focus on getting to know the empire as it is and running the empire as it is. And he does get to know the empire. He travels. We're used to this now. Presidents and world leaders, they go all over the world, meet each other, shake hands. They go all over their own countries all the time. That wasn't so much the norm before the time of Hadrian, but Hadrian spends half of his rule visiting all the places of the empire. If you're interested in that, by the way, Robin Lane Fox's The Classical World tries to tell the whole history of Greece and Rome, but he uses Hadrian's grand tour of the empire as sort of the context in which to do that. If you need a copy of that, I do have electronic ones, and there is one in the library. The last of the 5 good emperors, Marcus Aurelius. The rarity that, what is he well known for, Cynthia?
He was a Stoic philosopher.
Yes, a genuine, bona fide philosopher king of, like, right out of Plato's dream come true, except Plato wasn't a Stoic.
But he was really cool. Obviously, I don't know him that well because he's dead, but I have this app called The Stoic, which gives me like quotes about him, and some of his philosophies are actually quite pristine. Like, you know, they're simple, but like, you know, like at the same time, it gives you a glimpse into how not only like idealistic he was, but like he sounds. If I had to pick an emperor to be under, it would be a toss-up between Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius. Like, you know, obviously I wouldn't want any emperor, but Hadrian and Marcus Aurelius would be my top 2 picks.
You don't want Caligula?
No.
No, he might skin you and wear you as clothes.
No.
Caligula. I mentioned Plato a minute ago. What does Plato say about the fate of every nation, the fate of every empire? Rome is at the top right now. Yes, Matt.
They're all going to fall.
Yes. Plato speaks of a cyclical view of history. Marcus Aurelius definitely understands that. Part of the Stoic philosophy is being resigned and accepting the forces of fortune. Plato sees governments inevitably moving from democracy to tyranny to collapse, and the cycle going over and over again. And thanks to the work of this historian, Polybius, probably the dominant historian of Rome, a Greek historian of Rome, Polybius gives Rome a lot of its sense of identity. And he suckers them in. If you had humanities last year, the year before, you know this. If you had it 3 years ago, we didn't talk about this. So he suckers them in by praising Rome as the greatest state of all time, as the perfect constitutional government, balancing, this is the Roman Republic, balancing monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. But inevitably, it will fall. Inevitably, the cycle will continue. What the next 150 or so years of Roman history are exactly, I'm not saying it's inevitable, but exactly that cycle. Only a couple times you have great talented figures in eras of otherwise very little talent who come in and stop the cycle and push the clock back. They can't do that forever, and that's our story tomorrow. But let's take a look at the next 150 or so years, not in any thorough way designed to make you an expert on the period, rather just to give you context for tomorrow's lesson on what happens when they're no longer able to hold back the cycle. The next dynasty to come in is the Severus dynasty, named after Emperor Septimus Severus. And when Septimus dies, he's one of the few emperors that gets to leave an empire to his son, or sons. So he leaves the empire to be split between Caracalla and Gaeta. There's a military leader named Macrinus who rises up and says, what did they do but be born? All right, that's not. Because Rome doesn't have the tradition of automatic primogeniture. Automatically the firstborn son gets to be emperor. It doesn't even have the tradition of automatically the emperor gets to name his successor. If he's a strong and respected emperor, he can. But this isn't a given because Augustus never set up a plan for succession. So Macrinus steps in and claims the imperial throne. And Caracalla and Gaeta are like, oh, that sucks. I guess we'll go work at Burger King. No, of course not. Their father left them, my father left me 1/4 of a 200-year-old house in Joliet, Illinois. Their father left them the Roman Empire. They want it. So the brothers go to war against Macrinus. Macrinus' reign is very short-lived. The Senate then, Macrinus experiences the damnatio memoria, the damnation of memory. It is made as if he never existed. Officially, Caracalla and Gaeta immediately succeeded Septimus Severus as co-emperors.
Was this the only time there were co-emperors?
No, there'll be, this may be the first, but don't quote me for sure on that. First off the top of my head.
Okay.
Remember when you're little and who's got siblings? And who's got younger siblings? Okay. And when mom and dad are in the room and they tell you stop arguing, share your toys. And then mom and dad leave the room. What often happens? Do you always continue sharing your toys with the younger siblings when mom and dad aren't looking?
No.
No, of course not. Well, the Roman Empire is a big, fancy toy. And Caracalla is not in the mood for sharing the Roman Empire with his brother Gaeta, so he has Gaeta killed. And after he kills off his brother, now Caracalla is sole emperor of Rome. There's trouble. The barbarian tribes outside the empire are always poking at the borders, always raiding, always looking to test Roman power, and you no longer have figures like Augustus or Hadrian or Marcus Aurelius on the throne. You've got Caracalla, so they want to see what they can get away with. So Caracalla leads his legions on a defensive expedition. He gets to Syria. He goes to visit a temple, but before he visits a temple, he's like, I gotta pee. So Caracalla is peeing by the side of the road when his own men cut him down and stab him to death.
With his pants down? Come on.
Yes.
Julius
Yes.
moment.
Yes. Caracalla is succeeded due to intricate plotting by Julia Domna, widow of Septimus Severus, Julia Somas, who is her niece. They're plotting to keep the power in the family. Julia Domna dies of cancer, but Julia Somas says, I got just the guy. My son, all right? He's a great nephew of Septimus Severus. He's a nephew of Caracalla. And he looks an awful lot like Caracalla. So she lets the word get out that her son is actually the illegitimate son of Caracalla, which gives him some more credibility. And she takes him to the legions and she says, look, Caracalla's son. Obviously she doesn't take him to the same legions that killed Caracalla. She takes him to the loyalists. Loyalists, that would be pretty dumb. Here's Caracalla's son in case you want to kill him too. Hey, go pee. Nothing's gonna happen. And she convinces them that he's Caracalla's son, and they name him emperor, and the Senate agrees. He's 14 years old. He's an Arab from Syria who's also a Roman citizen. He on the Italian side of the family, or the Roman side of the family, he is deeply connected to at least the current dynasty. On the Syrian Arab side of the family, the men of his family were hereditary high priests of the god Ila al-Jabal, who is a god of the mountain. 14-year-old emperor, who's also high priest of this foreign god, is handed the empire. Right? And he brings his religious beliefs with him, and he brings every depraved appetite you can imagine with him. He tortures and kills. He offers children as human sacrifices. He will disembowel little children to read their entrails to try to tell the future. And then he will host banquets where you almost can't walk because the floor is so slick with the guts of the children he has disemboweled. He gets married 4 times, 5 times. The first 3 times, he gets married and then he divorces them. He sends them out on the wedding night because he finds some flaw with their body that he's not happy with. His 4th wife is a Vestal virgin. What are Vestal virgins not allowed to do? Or get married, right? They're like ancient Roman nuns. They're priestesses of the goddess Vesta, goddess of hearth and home. And there aren't many Roman cults like this, but that cult demands lifelong celibacy from the priestesses. So he's showing contempt to Roman religion. His next marriage is to a dude. And then, so he's married to the Vestal Virgin and to this enslaved boy servant of him. So, at the same time.
Pause.
Yes.
What? You're kidding, right?
No. No.
God, this guy's so brave.
And he puts out word to all throughout the empire. He's looking for a doctor who can perform a procedure on him that won't actually exist for centuries and centuries and centuries, but he wants a sex change operation, but there is no such thing.
What the fuck? This is literally Mr. Garrison.
So he dresses as a woman. He will dress as a woman. He will go to the brothels. He will throw all the prostitutes out, and then he will prostitute himself to the male customers, who probably weren't going there expecting a 14, 15, 16-year-old dude, but he's the emperor who disembowels children, so you kind of do.
Mr. Garrison.
You kind of, yeah, he is the Mr. Garrison of the ancient world.
Did he have a puppet friend?
Eventually the legions get tired of him, and even his own mother gets tired of him, and they conspire together. And so he reigns 3 years before he is murdered.
Wait, he does
There'll
that
be
up until 1701.
Mhm.
Sounds like 40 years of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he had a lot of time on his hand because he did nothing
He said 5 marriages.
that an emperor is supposed to do. He just sort of ignored the empire and just sort of lived it up. Just was interested in his own fun, his own pleasure. There'll be one more member of this dynasty. Here's. I haven't even told you his name. Oh, sorry. So a lot of the emperors, 14-year-old emperor. A lot of the emperors we know by nicknames that are given to them by the people, which is helpful because the Romans don't have the custom of saying this is Augustus the first, the second, the third, the fourth, and unhelpfully, his actual name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Pius Augustus. Unhelpfully, he's known to history as Elagabalus because the Romanized, the Latinized version of the god he served is Elagabal. So we enter the 200s. We enter a period of, it sounds like the last group of emperors really were on top of things, but they weren't. So the 200s, the 3rd century, is a period of non-stop crisis. Barbarian invasions, hyperinflation, so the Roman money is worth less and less and less. You have invaders who are, Rome is losing territory left and right, or east and west. Huge chunks, they lose Syria and Palestine and Egypt. Huge chunks of the empire are being carved off. You have nearly 30 emperors in a 50-year period. And here's how that normally goes. So we are at a military camp. And I say, Omar, come forth.
You go die.
Omar, we name you Imperator. All hail Caesar.
All hail Caesar!
That guy.
Actually, nah, you know what?
Oh no.
Josh Burgess, come forth.
Bye.
See, now hear me out.
I mean, it was really a while.
Josh Burgess, we name you Imperator. All hail Caesar.
All hail Caesar.
Actually, kind of what had happened was, you know what? We name me Imperator. All hail Caesar.
All hail Caesar.
Actually, you know what? And so it comes, and so it goes. The empire barely survives the 3rd century until the emergence of Aurelian. Aurelian only reigns for 5 years, 270 to 275. But for the first time in 100 years, you have a man of true competence, militarily, politically. He regains almost all the territory of the empire, and he has a vision. He looks in Persia, in the long-standing enemy of the Romans. In Persia, the Persian king has an added benefit of there being Zoroastrianism is the majority religion and state religion of the Persians, and there is an official Zoroastrian priesthood structure that is the established church, if you will, of the empire, which then the Persian Empire, which the Persian King of Kings can use and manipulate to his benefit. Rome is a hodgepodge of both ancient, truly ancient at the time, religious cults, and all sorts of new religious movements. And Aurelian's vision is we need there to be one God, one empire. This is easier to do in a polytheistic scenario. So he nominates Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. It's unclear whether this Sol is the older Roman god of the sun, who is nearly identical to Helios of Greece, if it is Elagabal from Syria, or a competing Palmyran Syrian sun god. At any rate, he elevates Sol Invictus to be the highest god of Rome, elevates Sol even over Jupiter, though sometimes people will associate the two rather than elevate one over the other. And he's not telling everybody you can't worship any other god. You don't, in a polytheistic theology, you don't have to do that. But he wants everybody participating in this cult of the unconquered sun. That's what Sol Invictus means. Cult of the unconquered sun that he's sort of cobbling together. But this is a major reform. And he dies within 5 years. So Sol Invictus is going to remain the prime god of the emperors, but never become the prime god of the empire. Yes, Kate?
Do you know how he died?
No, not off the top of my head, no. I should. I'm the worst. Somebody Google that for me. How did...
What are you teaching, sir? Come on.
Probably wasn't shot. It's going to fall to Diocletian, who will become emperor about 10 years later. It's going to fall to Diocletian. How did Aurelia die?
So, he was basically on a Persian expedition. However, Aurelian never reached Persia as he was murdered while waiting in Thrace to cross into Asia Minor.
Okay. Killed on the way to a military campaign. Diocletian, who reigns 10 years later, is going to do more than anyone else to make sure that Aurelian's political reforms, political accomplishments, and military accomplishments become semi-permanent. So it's Diocletian who is really holding back the cycle. Diocletian is almost an ideal emperor. Asterisk. Flashing, throbbing asterisk. But he's not interested in his own power being as great as possible. He's not self-absorbed. He's not a psychopath like Caligula and Nero. He doesn't want to hoard the wealth. He doesn't want to hoard the power. So he draws a line down the middle of the empire, east and west. He says, this is too much for one man, it's too much for me. So now, we're still one empire, but I will name a completely equal co-emperor. So there are two senior emperors, totally equal. One to rule the east, one to rule the west. And those emperors will have the title Augustus. And I will take each of the halves and I will split them in half. So 1/4 will be directly overseen by the Augustus. And for the other 2/4, I will name two junior emperors. True emperors, but of a secondary rank. And their title will be Caesar. So he shares his power with 3 other people. It's called the Tetrarchy. And then he looks at what he's accomplished, which is a lot. And he says, all right, my work here's done. And he retires and he goes back to his farm.
Are you kidding?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my god.
He before that, he didn't accept, the only emperor who declined to accept from the Senate named him Princeps first. Nope, I'm just here to do the work. I'm just here to do the work to fix the empire, stabilize the empire.
Is 305 there? Is that his death date then, or
His abdicate. So the R means reign. Reign from 284 to 305. Yes.
So wouldn't that be 20 years?
Yeah. Did I say it?
You said 10. You said 10.
Did I?
Yes.
Oh. Oh no! I said he comes in about 10 years after Aurelian.
Okay, that's it.
About 10 years after
Thank you, sir.
Aurelian. Remember the pulsating asterisk?
Uh-oh, no, he was so good.
Yeah. Not if, I'm not asking for a show of hands, but if any of you come from church-going families, he'd have fed your ass right to the lions. He was the worst of the Roman persecutors of Christians. The empire had been off and on persecuting Christians since the time of Nero. It's under Nero that traditionally Saints Peter and Paul were martyred in the 60s AD. Diocletian's persecution is the worst. Even though Aurelian's sole Invictus established church religious system never really catches on, Diocletian still wants it. That's still a very helpful tool in an emperor's tool chest to have an established religion in his pocket. And the Christians, like the Jews, don't play nice with other religions because they're monotheists. They won't worship Sol Invictus. They won't offer sacrifice to the genius of the emperor. And by this time, they are growing. They are growing. And he wants to stamp them out because he sees that as a threat to the empire.
Doesn't
tiger with the lion.
What's that? Yeah, lions and tigers. Yeah, they'd feed them. That's what the Colosseum was for. Feeding Christians. Feed lions. But now the Diocletian's gone. St. Constantine the Great comes in. Constantine's mother was a Christian. Constantine practices the Sol Invictus cult. And Constantine's first priority, you know this power sharing with another Augustus and two other Caesars? Constantine's not okay with that. So Constantine first goes to war to wipe out the three other emperors and consolidate power to himself. Later legend will say, this legend doesn't occur during Constantine's life in any of the sources. Later legend will say that at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, which is the decisive battle where he consolidated total power, that in the sky he saw a cross with not a streamer, a banner that says, "In hoc signo vinces," in this sign conquer. In his lifetime, he just talks about seeing a bright light. It's not clear how he interprets it. He probably originally if it ever happened, he probably originally interprets it as Sol Invictus. But the later legend says that from that point forward, Constantine was a Christian. He wasn't. He was baptized on his deathbed. But what he did is he was sympathetic to Christianity. His mother was a Christian, and he legalized Christianity in year 313. In fact, it's the first religious freedom law in all the history of the world, is Constantine's Edict of Toleration. You won't see another one until the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But for about, 80 minus 13, for about, 70 years or so, there's religious freedom in the Roman Empire. He begins showering favor on the church. Part of his motivation seems to be this. He's never going to get, he's still putting, but he's never going to get the people to really care about Sol Invictus. Sol Invictus can't compete with Jupiter and Athena and all that. He's never going to be able to build this structured, established church. Was it not a word they would have used, but Christianity already has that. By the time of Constantine, Christianity already has a very formal, even though it's operating underground, it has a very formal institutionalized structure which serves as a communication network that spans the empire and beyond. Constantine says, yep, that's going to be it. So Constantine begins to shower favor on the church, and he also wants to make sure if we're going to have an official established church of the empire, then we need to get straight what that church teaches and what that church believes. So Constantine calls not all the bishops of the world, but a representative sampling of all the bishops of the world to the city of Nicaea in Turkey in the year 325, and they craft what is going to be the first official statement of what Christian religion is all about. Christianity is at this point becomes a creedal faith. It's about believing certain truth claims to be true. And the stories we tell and the practice you do become secondary from that moment. That document is known as the Nicene Creed, and lots of churches, Catholic churches, Anglican churches, perhaps some High Church Lutherans, still recite that every Sunday. So Constantine reconsolidates power under himself. I thought I had a map in here, I guess I don't. Constantine reconsolidates power under himself. He also founds a new capital, the city of Byzantium in present-day Turkey, which he names after himself, becomes Constantinople. He doesn't like the stink of Rome. He builds this glorious new city, and other than his palace, all the biggest stuff is churches. So he's pouring money on the church. He leads that council of bishops, still not having been baptized. He does become a Christian officially through baptism on his deathbed. And then in his will, he splits the empire back in half and leaves it to his to two of his sons. A little bit later, Julian the Apostate, grandson, I believe, but I'd have to double check the exact relation, becomes emperor, and he's going to be the last pagan or last non-Christian emperor. He tries to restore the old faith, but by then, once Constantine started showing favor on the church, the people flooded in. Julian will be the last non-Christian emperor. Theodosius, who reigns from 347 to 395, long reign, powerful reign. He once again reconsolidates the whole empire under him, under a single emperor. That will only happen again one more time. There will be only one other man who rules the whole emperor, or the whole empire. His name's Justinian. We'll hear about him next week. Theodosius makes Christianity the official religion of the empire in 381. After Theodosius' death, once again a line is drawn down the middle of the empire, and this will be fairly permanent. That now still one empire, but there will be an emperor of the east in Constantinople, who is responsible for the purple territory, an emperor of the west in Rome, who's responsible for the red territory. Every so often there'll be some jealousy, some conflict, some minor military skirmishing, but generally speaking, it's a system that works for the next few decades. But how long can they hold Plato's cycle back is the question. We'll find out about that tomorrow. Any last thoughts or questions or anything, Smee?
So this is just kind of like a curious question, but when you mentioned Constantinople, do you know by any chance off the top of your head
It's nobody's business but the Turks.
how it became Istanbul?
That's nobody's business but the
Oh
Turks.
my god!
Yeah. When the Ottomans conquered in 1453, this had been much whittled down by then, but the Eastern Roman Empire lasted until 1453, just a few decades before Columbus. Constantine the 11th was the last emperor. He died in battle.
Against the Ottomans.
Yeah, opposed the Ottomans, but they changed the name to Istanbul. They also the Ottoman Sultan had the habit of every time he'd conquer, sort of wipe out a political unit and just, now I own you now, and you're no longer functioning, like he did to the Roman Empire. He would absorb the title. So up till 1917 or 18, whenever the Ottoman Empire was finally dismantled at the end of World War I, the Ottoman sultans had a big long list of titles, but Caesar of Rome was one of his titles. He earned it. But that's getting way ahead of us. That's in the 1400s. We're about to enter the 400s too. Any last? All right. I forgot to mention this during the lecture, but probably in fact, certainly the single most important source behind the material I presented in this lesson was Allen Brent's A Political History of Early Christianity. I cannot recommend that text highly enough for people interested in what's going on behind the scenes during this time period, particularly the long-standing Roman imperial desire to establish something like a state church, and what led the empire to say, hey, wait a minute, something like this already exists in the Catholic Church. A Political History of Early Christianity by Allen Brent.